You have one precious life. How will you make your money work for you? It's time for Sage Money Conversations, where your financial happiness and confidence are always the subject. Here's your host, certified financial planner, Barbara Norman.
Hello and welcome to Sage Money Conversations. I am your host, Barbara Norman, and I am thrilled about today's podcast. It seems we have a happiness problem in the U.S. When I ask people what makes them happy, what do you want to have happen when you lay your head on the last pillow of your day? What's your life there for? Most people do not know how to answer that question, and it makes me sad. So I went on a quest. I went out to find professionals who I think could help us find a solution, help us dig out how do we identify those things in our life and how do we go after them. Literally, I had 5 conversations in a row with professionals who only wanted to talk about family of origin issues. This did not make me happy. But now we have Dr. Robin Buckley, who's given me some of the most common sense, solid advice about how to find purpose and joy in our lives. Robin is the CEO and founder of Insights Group Psychology and Coaching Services. She earned her Ph.D. in psychology and worked at the North Central University as a thesis director for 7 years. But more important, Robin's just pure fun. As always, if you want to learn more, you can go on to my website, SagePath Solutions, and click on the Learning tab, or you can set up a conversation and we can talk about how you can create a financial plan that brings joy and purpose to your life. So, Robin, welcome to the show. I am so excited to host you today. So when women go through divorce or widowhood, or as you said it, Robin, they're just a little bit uncoupled, what I find is I try and dig out from them, like, what makes you happy? What brings you joy in this life? When you lay your head on the pillow the last day of your life, what do you want to have happen? Yep. And people are dumbfounded. They can't answer that question. And so here you have on your website this really beautiful quote. What if in that place you could develop a plan to get all you want in your professional and your relationship life? So let me ask you, when people are coming out of these horrible places of divorce or widowhood, and there's lots of fear and loneliness, and they're having to recreate themselves, where do we even start?
Yeah, the first place I always stress with my clients who are in one of those situations is it starts with knowing who you are. And I call it dating yourself, that taking that time to really allow the alone time to figure out who am I and what do I really want? Because as you know, Barbara, these individuals typically, if they know what they want, very often it's based on who they were when they were first married, and they base that as what they want now. Instead of saying, wow, I've been through a 20, 30, 40, 50-year marriage. Now I've lost my spouse due to divorce or a death. Am I still that same person? Do I still want the same things, not only in my life, but from a potential partner?
Yeah.
And the only way to know that is if you take some time. And I say alone, and I certainly don't mean you have to isolate. You can certainly go out in groups and be with people, but not in that attached, coupled way. Taking the time to be an uncoupled individual and really get to know who you are now at this stage in life, not being part of a couple, because there's no way you're the same person as you were when you were in that couple or when you first established that couple.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And friendships have changed, relationships have changed. Right. You know, if you were a couple before and you're not a couple now, like, how do you even maintain those?
Right. And I always say that I hope you have changed, that you've evolved through your own experiences, through the experience with your, past spouse or partner. So how often do any of us, including myself, stop and say, who am I now? How have I evolved? And it's, I hope more people do that regularly, but maybe not enough. And certainly if you've just come through a really traumatic situation like a death or a divorce, that is a great time to really connect with yourself and really start to think about, okay, what do I want? Not what do I need, but what do I want in my life now? So it's a really wonderful time once you get past the negative emotion.
Yeah. And it's getting past that negative emotion. It's so funny. I'm sitting here listening to you talk, and all I can think about is that scene in Runaway Bride where Julia Roberts kept fleeing all these marriages, and then shows her 3 plates of eggs and she's trying to figure out how does she like her eggs.
Right. Oh my gosh, that's a great scene. And that is so true. Like it's so easy when you're in a relationship to adopt the likes and the wants of the person you're with. And not because necessarily they're controlling or you're weak. It's just you fuse. And now that you're unfused, what eggs do you like? What do you really, do you like eggs at all? It is that time to really connect with yourself, because by connecting with yourself, then you can make strategic, logical plans about what you want for yourself and what, if you choose to be a part of a couple, what do you want out of that relationship and that other person?
So let's start at the beginning of this. Let's just kind of play around, if you will. I'll be a test case.
Yeah,
Let's just say that I'm in this place of anger and loneliness, and I'm sitting at home and just really dwelling in it. What are some of the things that you would coach your clients to how do you just start?
Yeah, the first step is getting your brain to be your ally, not your adversary. So when we're feeling all these negative emotions, whether it's sadness, frustration, anger, bitterness, whatever it is, our brain is running itself like a toddler, and we can choose to pull it back. Mm-hmm. Gently or not, but we can do that. People assume that our emotions, we can't control them. We just have emotions and there's nothing we can do about it. And that isn't true. Our emotions come from a thought. Every emotion we have, good or bad, comes from a thought. And if we can identify the thought, then we can choose how long we have that thought. So it's when people will, sometimes challenge me, they'll say, well, I want to be sad. Okay. If you want to be sad, if it's serving you to, as a catharsis, whatever, okay, but make it a choice of what you're feeling, not that the feeling is just happening. Because at some point you might choose, I'm tired of being sad. And then if you can identify the thought that's creating the sadness. So for example, a client I worked with recently, her sadness was actually not as much about losing her husband of 30 years. It was actually that she was sad that she really assumed she was going to be alone for the rest of her life. And she was only 50. And so once she identified what that was, we could change that. We could reframe the thought so that it was based on more of a logical approach. Do you really think you're going to be completely alone for the next, 30 to 40 years? And she's like, well, no, I'll have friends. Right. So how can we use your friendships to make you have that connection? And so we start building a plan around logic and around strategic thinking rather than emotional reactions. So the first place I start with almost all clients is, what are the emotions you're having? Are they serving you towards whatever your goal is for yourself, your career, or your relationship? And if they're not, how can we target those thoughts by reframing them and changing them to thoughts that actually make you feel empowered, happy, joyful, optimistic, whatever it is that is going to serve you?
Oh, I love that.
Thanks.
I love that. Kind of reining in the monkey and retraining the brain with some
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're kind of reframing our thinking. What would be a next best step?
So the next best step is looking at purpose. What things build your sense of purpose? And it can be anything. And I explain to my clients, there's no judgment. If your sense of purpose is finding a new outfit every single week at a consignment store or Nordstrom's, that's okay, as long as it really does bring you that joy, bring you that sense of fulfillment. It's not for anybody else to judge. So I've heard everything from something like that all the way to, volunteering time and everything in between. So it's looking at what at this point in your life, whenever that is, what truly brings you that sense of fulfillment, and looking at whether your daily activities contribute to that sense of fulfillment. So if it is volunteerism, do you volunteer? If you do, is it an organization that you truly believe in and really are connected to? Or is it an organization you've been doing volunteer work for 30 years and now you've lost the connection for whatever reason? So it's building in that sense, because your sense of purpose really does start to embed itself as part of your identity. And once we start to connect with our identity, that's that step of dating yourself and really knowing who you are at this point. So whatever the purpose is, and there certainly can be lots of things that contribute to your overall sense of purpose, it's building in activities that create and contribute to that sense of purpose. So that would be the next step.
I love that. And I think about, growing up, and again, I'm sorry, this is really weird, but I keep coming up on these TV shows. Weeds, the little houses on the hillside,
Oh,
and everybody had to, Stepford Wives, everybody had to look the same, be the same. And that's how we identified ourselves. And we haven't stopped to look at it. And I think there's been this shift in COVID where we've all had now to stay home and be with ourselves. And there's like this hardcore emptiness that I'm seeing with a lot of people. And they're having a hard time identifying what is it that makes me happy. And so,
Agreed. And I think that as I'm watching clients and people I know go back out into the world, there is this negative fluidness where they just don't even know where to land or where to gravitate to, because either the options are overwhelming because they haven't been for 2 years, or the options that they used to have aren't there anymore, either loss of connections, loss of opportunities. So it is an interesting place to see how people are reconfiguring and realigning with what their purpose is now versus where it was 2 years ago. It's a great example.
Well, and let me do this too, because what I'm finding with a lot of people is they're finding that the connections that they had before COVID, they don't want to reconnect. And so how do we come up with the big no? Like, how do we start saying no to people when it doesn't work for us anymore?
Absolutely. And I think that is kind of going back to that as we're talking about dating yourself. It's really evaluating what are your core values. And that's something that I do work with clients. And we go through an activity that actually, if anybody's interested in, the activity is on my website. It's a free activity that people can do. And when we say to people, if I said to you, Barbara, what are your core values? You might be able to come up with some, but at some point for most people, after they've hit 2 or 3, they're like, I don't know after that, like that's about it. And those are the people that can do it. Some people are like, I don't know, I'm a good person, which is lovely, but that's actually not a value. That's kind of a really vague generalization. So really spending some time really thinking about, okay, what am I truly motivated by? What is truly my qualifier of a good life or being the person I want to be? Because once we understand so now we have our brain in alignment, we've got our purpose, we understand our core values. That's when we can now take the next leap to saying, okay, now who, friends or romantic relationships, who aligns with all of that? Who can contribute to all of that? And most essentially, what are the negotiables and the non-negotiables? What are the things I'm willing to be flexible and compromise in a relationship, friendship or otherwise? And what are the things that are an absolute, to answer your question, no, I'm not compromising on that because it goes against my value, it goes against my purpose, and it messes with the brain that I finally, controlled the monkey, to use your analogy. But those negotiables and non-negotiables, I think, are so important to think about when you're not in the relationship. Because again, when the bright, shiny person shows up in front of you, it's too easy to say, oh, it's okay, I don't need that. Instead of saying, nope, that was on my non-negotiable list. I actually wrote it down, and that is not where I'm compromising.
So help me with this. Really help me with this. How do people say no? Like, this just isn't working for, it's not you, it's me. What are the words that people use to say, I just can't do this anymore? I mean, we're all wanting to please. We are people pleasers. We want to help. We want to be amiable, but how do we say no? I
actually typically recommend to people that they don't say no, at least to start, because it's a hard word for a lot of people. So when if I said to people, well, just say no, that's easier said than done.
Right.
So try and phrase it, because for most humans, they need to feel like they're doing something good for the other person too. So very often it's something like, right now that doesn't seem, what you're focused on and what I'm focused on aren't in alignment. And I think that we really need to respect what each of us is really seen as our purpose right now. So it's, it's not saying it's you or me, it's saying for both of us, this doesn't work. And I think that's actually not even a euphemism. It's typically true that when you're being asked to do something, or you're, in a situation where you're dating or in a friendship and it's not quite in alignment, it's not just one-sided. It's a misalignment between both people. And being just that kind of honesty where it's not, again, you're not saying anything about their personality. It's a misalignment between where we want to put our focus, a misalignment between our purposes right now. And it'd be better for us to save our energy for what does align. And we can always touch base later on to see if those intertwine again. So I do tend to pull people away from the nope, can't do it. If they can say it, that's awesome. I just don't meet many people that can say no quite as directly with as much effectiveness. So giving them that opportunity to say clearly, it's just not what's working for myself or for you right now.
Yeah. And you're right. It's easier said than done. I'm thinking about saying this and I'm, breaking out in hives and I'm getting nervous. But then, like you said, once you're on the other side of that kind of a conversation, and now we're moving into those places where it is serving our purpose and our passion and our happiness, which leads me to the next beautiful thing on your website. And that's about finding people who will love us, hold us accountable. How do we start now building those communities of friendships and, kind of building our own tribe that's going to move us forward and that we can share this joy with?
Yeah, I love that question so much, Barbara. And I love when people ask me something similar to that. So a lot of what the work I do, I created a model that as of yet, I haven't found anyone else using. So this proprietary model is about how to apply business frameworks to relationships.
Oh.
And so we're not talking about emotion, and I'm not downplaying the importance of emotion, but emotion clouds strategic thinking. And, I use the analogy that I love ice cream, but I wouldn't start an ice cream business just because I love ice cream. I would hope that I would sit down and create a business plan, so it's a successful business. But when we create friendships and when we create romantic relationships, we do it based on emotion without any strategy. And why would we do that? Because we wouldn't do that in business, because we know that having a strategy and a plan actually is going to have a higher rate of return on investment and success. And the same is true in relationships.
That is fascinating. I have never heard anybody say that before. So tell me more.
I do not downplay people who struggle with this idea at first will say, no, but it's about emotion and sexual connection or love, and those are all wonderful. But those are the bells and whistles that if you have a strong foundation, those are all going to get better and better. But it is establishing the plan first. So what I talk about, particularly with uncoupled individuals, is a concept called an ICA. And in business, ICA stands for Ideal Client Avatar. And businesses will use this to try and figure out who their ideal customer is, how they're going to market to them, how they're going to find them, what characteristics create this ideal customer so they know who to look for. Well, the same is true in friendships. If you're trying to build your tribe or romantic relationships, you can create an ICA, in this case, an ideal companion avatar. And you can think about things, again, before you're putting yourself out there of who am I really looking for? What are the values I want to find in someone else? How do they align with my own values? You're building this avatar around basically a profile of who you want in your life, who you want to attract, who you want to associate with. And it becomes your template. Again, it also contributes to your list of negotiables and non-negotiables to be able to go out there and say, this is the person that I want to spend more time with. Again, friendship or otherwise, because most of us have had the experience of you meet someone, they seem great. And then all of a sudden, a couple weeks down the road or a couple months down the road, you're like, oh my gosh, how do I get out of this next lunch? Because I don't want to spend time with him or her. Instead of right from the beginning, knowing, actually, when I compare it against my list, they have almost everything that I want in terms of the non-negotiables. And the negotiables are small, and I can work with those. We can compromise around those. So you create your ICA. And what that does is after you have this template, and I'm not suggesting you whip it out at lunch and use it as a checklist, but you have it in your head so it keeps you focused and you're not distracted by some of the other things that might be easy. Wow, this person has a really beautiful sailboat and I love sailing. So I'm just going to forget about all the things that were non-negotiables. You're like, nope, this is a good one-time thing, but it's not where I'm going to put my time and energy. Mm-hmm. From that, it helps you determine where might you find this tribe? Where might you find these people? Again, sometimes people have a hard time because they're like, so you're being manipulative? I'm like, no, manipulative, first of all, has it's a term that actually doesn't mean what society uses it for. Manipulation means adjusting the situation to hit a goal. Now, negative manipulation is never something I would encourage or condone. That's like intentionally forsaking someone else just to get to what you want. But if you manipulate a situation so that you can meet particular types of people, friends or otherwise, that's positive manipulation. You're not doing anything to hurt them, and you are structuring strategically how you want to meet these people. So if you are interested in sailing, your ICA is people who share that same passion, then maybe joining a yacht club or a boating club so you can meet people who do the thing you want. Or if you love running, joining a running club or, doing those kind of things that of course seem logical, But a lot of times we're just desperate to meet people and we just put ourselves out there and don't really think about, is this really the right place to meet that type of person? A lot of my clients still resort to going to bars, on the weekends to meet people. I'm like, okay, but is it the type of person you want to meet? And not creating a judgment around it, but will it be likely that you'll meet people who are into running at this bar? If it's a bar at a health club, maybe, but otherwise, so it creates a strategy around building our tribe instead of the trial and error that ends up leaving people very frustrated.
Yeah, and alone.
Yes.
Any other thoughts for our listeners? If someone is we've gone through lots of wonderful things about, now I'm out of this marriage. I'm going to start remaking myself. Do you have any other thoughts for our listeners? What would it be?
I think the first one would be not to actually remake yourself. It's start with your strengths. What are the things about you that you want to emphasize that are kind of your grounding points? What are the things about you that you want to hold on to? And maybe there are things that you haven't thought about in a long time that you're like, oh, I really miss doing that. Or I really miss that part of me because I gave it up for whatever reason. You don't necessarily have to start with a reinvention. It's just making sure that the parts of you that are still strong or that can be strong again, or that are really wonderful about you, you allow those to come out and play. You allow those to be part of you. And then they create, again, a foundation for maybe the new things you're going to bring into your life. So when a lot of times, particularly the women I work with will say, well, I have to change everything. No. Oh, goodness, no, because changing everything means there's nothing left of who you actually are. So let's look at the things that you want to retain, that you can retain. And then those can just be kind of the place where everything else grows. So that would be something I would strongly emphasize. And then the second one would be really make sure that, specifically in regards to romantic relationships, make sure it's what you really want. You might not want that right away. You might be existing off of a past habit of being in a relationship, and it's just a habit. It's just a comfort because it is something you've gotten used to. Maybe after you get past that period of transition, you decide, oh, heck, this is kind of nice to have a little bit of like my own time. And that's okay. So it's taking the time to make sure what the next step, again, strategically, before you're in it, before you're in the middle of something, because strategy doesn't happen as a reaction. Strategy happens as a proactive step before you react, before you have an action. So those would be a couple of things that I'd recommend.
I love all of this. And I'm thinking about your website and going on and doing that test of, what are my values? What are the things that I want? And then building from there. How cool is that?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I love that tool too, because it allows me to engage with people. They'll go on, they'll fill it out, and it's like a 3-step process. So just through email, I get to engage with them. And it's just always, I value the opportunity just to have really informal, very brief conversations with people that I know, whether they work with me or not, I know that it's going to get them to the next step. And I really treasure that.
I love that. So if I wanted to work with you, Robin, how would I do that?
Sure. There's lots of places people can find me. If your audience does social media, I'm on Instagram. A lot of my clients love it because they have a connection to me in between sessions. I'm on LinkedIn, and I am also on Twitter. But my website is easy. It's Dr. Robin Buckley, no spaces, no periods, .com. So they can easily find the values inventory there and then learn more about me there.
So, and Buckley, Buckley?
Correct. Yeah. Robin like the bird and Buckley. Then the other thing that on my website that a lot of clients also find helpful is I've done a lot of podcasts like yours, Barbara, but I've also written a lot of articles and they're all there. So it becomes a great resource, again, for people, whether they work with me or not, just to learn more about different topics that are related to the work I do.
I love that. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time today. You have given us a wealth of information. My heart is just glowing right now. I can't wait to get in and check it out.
This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate your style of having a conversation. So thank you.
Oh, it is. Well, I think that we have such a happiness problem in the United States, well, probably all over the world, but we have such a happiness problem. And what do we do to bring joy back into our life? And you are just nailing it over there. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Barbara.
Advisory services are offered through Barbara J. Norman, LLC, an investment advisor in the states of California and Texas. The information contained herein should in no way be construed or interpreted as a solicitation to sell, nor an offer to sell advisory services to any residents of any state other than the state of California, or where otherwise legally permitted. All content is for information purposes only. It is not intended to provide any tax or legal advice or provide the basis for any financial decisions. The information contained in this material has been derived from sources believed to be reliable, but is not guaranteed as to accuracy and completeness and does not purport to be complete analysis of the materials discussed. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of SagePath Solutions and are subject to change without notice.